This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Welcome to the Fatigue Fixer podcast. Ever wonder why it feels like the entire sisterhood is just so darn exhausted? We're diving deep into everything from those sneaky physical culprits, think iron levels, playing hide and seek, or a moody thyroid, to the mental weights of always being on and that sneaky urge to please everyone. And let's not forget society's oh-so-high bar that we're tirelessly trying to reach. I'm Dr. Sarah Vadebonkar, your guide on this energy-finding mission. As a naturopathic doctor with over a decade of experience, I've been piecing together the fatigue puzzle, asking why so many incredible women around me, including my patients, often feel like they're running on empty. So pull up a chair or perhaps pop in your headphones and head out for a walk. Together we'll uncover those hidden, surprising, and sometimes even downright unexpected reasons behind that lingering tiredness. Ready to recharge those batteries? All right, deep breath. Let's jump into today's insightful episode. One of the themes we're exploring this season on the podcast is how ignoring your own body's cycles, messages, and innate wisdom is contributing to the state of women's health, and it's not working out so well for us. It's making us tired, often unhappy, and sick, and I also wondered how it might be affecting our fertility. A couple months ago, I was reading an article in the Globe and Mail that was explaining how a lot of companies are now offering health benefits that include IVF and egg freezing. And part of me was like, this is amazing. It's making these technologies more accessible. It's giving more women more control over their reproduction. But the other part of me also wondered, are we just perpetuating the idea that fertility is something we can delay and simply circle back to when it's a good time for us? And is that maybe fueling some issues for us down the line and contributing to the infertility rates we're seeing? Now, I want to be super clear. This is not about judging an individual woman's choice to pursue egg freezing or IVF. I've had very close people in my life go down that path and watched and been both awe-inspired and also found it gut-wrenching just to see what women are willing to submit to in order to become mothers. Where I want to hang out today is really more around exploring how our current societal norms have led so many women to delay childbearing and what some of the potential benefits are, but maybe also what some of the risks or unintended consequences are of doing so. Even if you're done having kids or you're child-free by choice, I think this episode is really about helping women better understand their bodies so we can make more informed choices. This is the one where you freeze your eggs, and my guest today is Dr. Alison Gottschalk. Dr. Alison Gottschalk is a licensed naturopathic doctor with a focus in women's hormonal health. She sees women from all across Ontario with her virtual clinic for concerns related to PCOS, fertility, and perimenopause. I discovered Alison through Instagram, and we're going to link to her. She's also on TikTok because she's putting out such great content, and I knew that she was the doctor that I wanted to have today's conversation with. Alison, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Sarah, for having me. I'm really excited.
Awesome. So let's start just with women's knowledge and understanding of their fertility. I was in a training all weekend, and one of the stats that was shared was that less than 10% of women could accurately answer questions about their monthly kind of fertility success and also age-related changes with fertility. And when I think back to what I was taught and what I think most of us were taught about our fertility was don't get pregnant, right? Put on a condom, don't do it, don't get pregnant. And then when we get to the point where we are ready to get pregnant, we obviously, most of us understand the basics of what needs to happen. But I think a lot of times we start to realize actually how complex and complicated it can be to get pregnant, even if there's nothing technically wrong. There are so many different things that need to happen in order for a woman to get pregnant. And it's sad to me how little so many women know about how their cycle actually works and kind of like the basics of fertility beyond, the bare bones of it. So what are you seeing in your clinical practice around kind of women's knowledge about their cycle and their fertility?
Exactly that too. So I was in the same conference as you this past weekend, and I remember hearing that as well. And it's not surprising. I feel like we're getting a lot better in terms of body literacy. Like women are becoming more, educated and informing themselves regarding, ovulation, what's normal when it comes to cycle regularity, what's not. But there still is a bit of that gap too, where we're oftentimes kind of having that educational piece being like, this is what an ideal cycle should look like. This is how we determine when ovulation or if ovulation is happening. So it's still definitely an ongoing conversation that's being had. And my take with that too is that the more we know about our body, the better off we are. We're able to better determine when things are maybe going astray, and we might want to add on additional support. It's nice to have a good baseline understanding of what your norm is, because there's certainly variation in terms of, say for example, with your cycle, you can have some individual variability there. But we want to figure out, if maybe you've had a big life stressor or something maybe going on outside of your health, that we're able to figure out, is it impacting your hormones, your cycle, and kind of figure out when things are suboptimal for you. But yeah, the more we know about our body, the better we are for sure. And this definitely ties in perfectly with fertility as well.
Yeah, I think so much of the conversation that we have around our cycle is still based on this idea of a 28-day cycle, right? And that really comes from the birth control pill. Most birth control pills operate on a 28-day cycle. So then a lot of women assume that a 28-day cycle is what's normal, when in fact anything between like a 26 to a 35-day cycle could actually be perfectly normal. So, and within that, again, if your cycle isn't 28 days, you're not ovulating on day 14. And that becomes really important information if you are either trying to not get pregnant, or if you are trying to get pregnant, you need to know when you're ovulating and if you're ovulating, like you said. So what are some of the things that you encourage women to do maybe before they're even thinking about getting pregnant? Like, how do you encourage them to start to get in touch with their cycle?
So starting with the basics of even cycle tracking, kind of getting some data that you're able to collect yourself in terms of like specific timelines for, how long you're bleeding for, how long your cycle is, any associated symptoms as well that might be, something we want to be addressing, like any migraine headaches that you're noticing at specific times, like how heavy is your period? Is that something we should be concerned with? The level of pain, is that also something that maybe we should touch in or look into further? But the more data you're able to collect for yourself over time, that's useful information for us to take a look at and see as kind of your overall picture. But starting, with what you can kind of collect over time, data-wise, and then we may want to do some like additional baseline health, assessment, any nutritional markers that maybe we want to correct for now that can sometimes take several months to years to optimize. For example, with iron, like that's one that should be a foundational test. Same thing with vitamin D as well. More so with iron, we can see that being, taking some time depending on how well you're able to absorb it, the dose we're doing. But that's a great thing to be looking at if you're not quite ready, for fertility just yet, but it's something down the road where we want to be proactive with some of those markers. The tricky the tricky aspect when it comes to fertility is that, we can't really predict, so to say, who's going to have issues and who's not. Yes, we know certain health concerns can make it more troublesome. So, say with PCOS, maybe with Hashimoto's, endometriosis, we can kind of have a gauge, but I don't know if you've seen this. I've definitely seen this in my practice where, you get the, say, late 20s female with, pretty good health overall. Like there's nothing really concerning, but there's been that struggle with conception. And we wouldn't have been able to predict that to be what's happening based on her underlying health. So it's a really hard to kind of figure out who's going to be having troubles and who's not.
Mm-hmm. So do you find that do people usually kind of wait till there's an issue to seek care? And should part of what we might want to think about as women is, if I'm thinking that I want to try to conceive maybe in the next year or two, that it's actually a great idea to book an appointment a year or two before to start to really get insight into the body, to run some of these basic labs, just to get like a clean slate of health, to see as soon as possible if there might be any red flags. What do you recommend in terms of like when women should maybe seek care in this journey?
I think if you're able to be proactive, that's always going to be kind of a great approach. And I find that there's usually two groups of people that we see. It's the ones that are maybe, very proactive in that sense, where there could also be some underlying fear associated with fertility. Like, my friend struggled with, infertility and, I'm worried about my future fertility. Can we just do some testing now to figure out if I'm going to have a problem, trying our best to maybe predict possible problems? And then there's another subset, of women where they stumble upon various health concerns once they have been trying for several months and it's not, there's no success. And then maybe they find out, say, they have PCOS after 6 months of trying, or, and it's not something that was ever on the radar because maybe they didn't have symptoms associated with that. So the more proactive we're able to be, the better. But even still, that doesn't guarantee that there won't be issues, which is the challenging part with all of this as well.
Absolutely. And just in terms of, again, women who are maybe thinking about it, and I think one of the beautiful things of working with a naturopathic doctor or someone who's got more time and ideally more expertise in fertility is we have more time to ask questions and do a good history, which can often bring up flags that might be missed. So one of the most common things I see is women get put on birth control as teenagers to cover something up. And so let's say they were dealing with super painful periods or irregular periods, they go on the pill, those symptoms get corrected or masked or managed with the pill, which is wonderful. But a lot of times those things haven't gone away. They're just being kind of masked by the pill. And so when the woman comes off the pill, she might be having some of those symptoms. So even just doing a really good history, having someone ask the right questions can really help to identify, like you said, PCOS, right? That's the number one reason why women are going to have irregular periods. And often that will start pretty soon after they develop their periods. And the number one cause of period pain, severe period pain, is endometriosis, which we know we do a terrible job at diagnosing. I think it's like it takes about 12 years on average for a woman to be diagnosed with endometriosis, something like that.
Yeah, I thought it was like maybe 8 to 10 years, but it's kind of looking at the decade mark, which is crazy.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to part of what is so wonderful about reconnecting with your body and tracking your cycle and really seeing what it's doing is it can help you figure out what's normal for you. Because part of what I've also seen is how much we have normalized certain menstrual issues because they're so common. And I think menstrual cramps are such a perfect example that women assume that period pain is normal, that it's something we just have to deal with, and that there's nothing we can do about it. Where I'm sure you would agree that is not the case. There's so much we can do. And again, if you have fertility goals and you're having severe menstrual pain, that could be a sign that there might be something like endometriosis, which ideally we would like to know and do something about before you try to conceive.
Absolutely. Yeah. So say you're in a group of, there's 5 of you, like 4 of your other girlfriends and you, and 3 other of your friends have, say, like severe menstrual pain. Within your friend group, yes, it can be a common experience that a lot of you are having period pains, but it doesn't imply that it's a normal aspect to be experiencing or ideal. And that sometimes that can be challenging if you're constantly just chatting with your girlfriends who also experience similar symptoms as you. It's like, well, maybe everybody experiences this. Maybe this is just what I should accept. But absolutely not. We need to be, you shouldn't by any means be struggling on the day-to-day with, menstrual pain, when it starts to impact your quality of life. So, definitely seeking out care, and because there's support that we can implement, which is what we need to be doing.
Yeah. And I think the sad part is, though, that a lot of this stuff also gets dismissed in the medical system. And I think that's one of the most frustrating experiences for female patients, is that they will go in to see their doctor. And sadly, it doesn't seem to matter whether you have a male or a female doctor. So much of these things get dismissed because they, again, have been normalized, not just in our society, but in our medical system as things that women just need to deal with, right? Here's your birth control, take an Advil, stop complaining, and like move along. I've got bigger things to worry about here. Do you see some of that happening as well?
Absolutely. And it's not even just specific to like reproductive, like menstrual related pains. Like it could be, hot flashes. It's just part of being a woman, just get through this period and then you'll be fine. It's like, no, we need to be, we can't have women on the masses struggling with these concerns. There's things we can do that are both safe and effective that we should be talking about.
Yeah. And I would add PMS in there. We'll probably do a whole other episode on PMS, but that's another very commonly dismissed thing. And what's so fascinating and what was shared in our conference that we were in this weekend is that when women understand their cycles, when we teach them some really basic things about fertility and cycles, they are more likely to have a baby at the end of that. So I find it like frustrating that we are not even teaching women the bare bones of what they might need to have a healthy pregnancy, to get pregnant, but yet we have no problem throwing them into egg freezing or an IVF cycle. And again, there's nothing wrong with those things, but could we maybe prevent or avoid needing some of those more invasive procedures if women just better understood what was actually happening with their cycle and how to, optimize their chances of getting pregnant?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, it's a big conversation, all of this to be having. And there's not, one right or wrong way to kind of go about this, so to say. I think as long as we're having those conversations, like you're bringing this up with your doctor, and if your doctor isn't maybe well-versed in, say egg freezing or like PMS, so to say, exploring other options. When we talk about even egg freezing, like let's say if that's something that is on the radar, one of a great source that you can seek out for additional support is actually connecting with some of these fertility clinics, these egg freezing clinics who offer like 30-minute calls to kind of go over and answer any questions that you may have. So you're kind of going directly to the source for some of those questions you may have. Maybe fear around, is it painful? How much is it? And kind of getting those answers, directly from the source, I think helps. But as long as we're having those conversations with, good quality sources, I think you can't really go wrong there.
Yeah. And I think that's what I hope this conversation will leave women with today is, number one, just a better understanding of what's actually happening with our fertility, which is what I want to start diving into. And also what their options are, because at the end of the day, the more informed you are, the better decisions you can make about your body and your life. We're here to just show you some of the different pieces of the puzzle that you might want to think about if this is kind of the journey that you're in. So you talked earlier about the fear, and I remember feeling this when I wanted to get pregnant, that I was like, what if I can't? And that wasn't based on there was nothing in my health history that would indicate that. I think it was based on this, we hear so much about infertility, and I think it can feel very scary to think if something's gonna go wrong with us. And I know, as women, we are told, fertility is a ticking time bomb. The older you get, the worse it's gonna be. And when you hit 40, it's like game over, and there you go. And I had to look this up because I've heard patients talk about it, but we literally refer to a pregnancy over the age of 35 as a geriatric pregnancy. I thought it was 40. No, it's 35. So what is actually happening to our fertility as we kind of age from, let's say, our 20s and our 30s into our 40s? What are some of the things that we see happening with our fertility?
So the biggest thing that we're seeing happening is a decrease in ovarian reserve, which is a fancy way of saying how many eggs you have stored within the ovaries. When we are 20 weeks gestation, we have in the millions of eggs within us, like 6 to I think 8 million eggs. By the time we are born, that dwindles down to about 1 to 2 million eggs. And it continually decreases with age up until, 30s to 40s when we, our ovarian reserve is at a zero and we are noticing, changes related to having a zero like ovarian reserve. Once and as we start to see that ovarian reserve decline, we will also start to see changes in how the brain is talking to the ovaries and how the ovaries are responding. And that may look like changes with your cycle, whether it's, shortened by 7 days or longer by 7 days, maybe PMS-like symptoms that you weren't used to experiencing that all of a sudden have become quite prominent, whether that's heightened anxiety, mood changes, feeling more irritable, quick to anger, or physical changes that you may not have noticed before, like breast tenderness, susceptibility to migraine headaches, just changes from your norm. Those can tell us a little bit more about what's going on hormonally as well. But usually when we talk about age-related, age as a factor with fertility, it's in relation to your ovarian reserve and what we're seeing hormonally as a result of that. And it's usually by age 35. So yeah, being considered having a geriatric pregnancy, which the term is just wild.
Terrible.
Like,
so
how
bad.
is that? Yeah. And I mean, it's not a nice term to be told, you're in a geriatric pregnancy. Like we need to be changing that as is. But at age 35 is where we statistically start to see changes and alterations in terms of pregnancy-related complications, labor and delivery-related complications at that point, and even our ability with conception. We start to see a sharp decrease at that point, which is why we kind of mid-30s, late 30s, we kind of want to have more of a clear idea of what we want to be doing fertility wise and maybe expediting our care to possibly working with a fertility clinic if that's something that's kind of on the radar. But yeah, usually when we're talking about age, it's kind of in relation to ovarian reserve. And that's one of the biggest aspects we want to be keeping in mind as well.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, so we know that age is probably the number one predictor of the decline in eggs that we have. How much does health and lifestyle influence not just maybe the number of eggs, but the quality of eggs that we have?
Yeah. So the count of eggs, so egg quantity, we don't have much, we can't impact that number very much, if at all. Whereas with egg quality, we absolutely can. And this is the aspect where lifestyle, dietary interventions can have a profound impact. And this is kind of where a lot of the egg quality supplements and, eating well, exercising frequently, taking care of your mental health, it's all absolutely linked to the quality of your eggs. And when we talk about egg freezing, that's ideally what we want to do is capture those eggs that are in great quality, which they tend to be better quality when we're younger as opposed to older. So we're trying to get them at the time when they're of highest quality, to hopefully prevent any issues with conception, with pregnancy, and with labor as well. But egg quality is the aspect that we can have the most profound impact with.
So kind of the take-home message, if I'm hearing this correctly, is that we can still get pregnant after 35 and 40. And certainly I think we've all seen that. But our body would really, maybe not our body would prefer, but our body is most fertile under the age of 35.
Yeah, I'd say that's
correct. As a general rule.
Yeah.
So this is the conundrum that I feel needs unpacking, because the way that society is now set up is that most women are delaying, a lot of women are delaying getting pregnant because we want to have a stable job. We might want to have a home. A lot of us want to have a partner, and those things can take time. And all of those things are getting shifted because we're spending more time in school, we're getting married or partnering up later. And it's everything keeps getting pushed. And I think the feminist part of me is amazing, we can work and do all the things. But then again, the naturopath part of me is but the body doesn't care. It doesn't care that you're waiting for that partnership at your job, or it doesn't care that you're waiting to make more money, or that you have the perfect house or the perfect partner. You are born with a set number of eggs, and they are going to decline over time. And so how do we acknowledge or work those two things together?
And that's the $1 million question. Yeah, that's the tricky part to figure out for sure.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask. So if you're seeing a woman, let's start with like a woman maybe in her 20s, and she's coming to you saying, I want to get pregnant at some point. Like, is there specific things that you would recommend or have a woman think about when she's in her 20s, specifically around her fertility?
Yeah. Again, cycle tracking, figuring out if there's any abnormalities there that might point us in one direction. There are some, basic labs that might be helpful for us knowing ahead of time, but we also want to be cognizant of not testing unnecessarily as well, right? Like not, we get asked a lot, can you test my AMH? I just want to know more about my, ovarian reserve. But we know that number alone it's impacted by so many different variables, and it doesn't tell us, what we want it to necessarily as a standalone test. So I think taking into account any symptoms that you might be experiencing, anything that might possibly be on the radar that we could maybe screen for ahead of time, like let's say, for example, with thyroid, are we wondering about thyroid health? Let's maybe add that on to our next requisition, testing maybe the antibodies and more of the thyroid markers. I'm a big believer in testing for the nutrient markers ahead of time, because those are things that usually take some time to bump up or increase anyways as is. So if we have the time, let's do that now. And, if there's anything going on maybe with your cycle, like you're maybe missing periods, we kind of want to figure out why maybe there's a stall in the ovulatory process ahead of time, implement support while we have the time. And then by the time, hopefully, we're thinking about, fertility or it's, conceptions on the radar, we will have supported the cycle a little bit more and at least started the investigation or the assessment prior to getting to that. So it really depends. There's not a huge list of labs. I would say everybody has to have this done, because I don't think that's the best approach. It should be individualized in that sense based on what you're feeling and the symptoms that you're experiencing. But like I said, nutrient markers, some basic labs like thyroid can be helpful as kind of a general for most people.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really stuck out from the conference this weekend was that women who have Hashimoto's, so who have kind of are positive for those thyroid antibodies, do tend to have lower egg reserve, which can impact their fertility. And that was something I'm certainly going to change in my practice. I don't do a lot of fertility, but I do see a lot of women with Hashimoto's. So if you are in your 20s and either have a family history of thyroid or autoimmune, that would be one of the things I would strongly push for, is testing for Hashimoto's. Because if you do show positive for those two markers, or one of the two, you might want to think about being more proactive with your fertility. Doesn't mean you have to get pregnant in your 20s, but it could impact your journey. And I think, again, the more information that women have, the better they can make kind of informed decisions.
Absolutely. And yeah, even just speaking to that conversation about AMH, how there can be links with Hashimoto's where it can seem lower. But we know the opposite with PCOS, where we commonly see high AMH with PCOS. And it's kind of tricky to decipher how useful that lab can be sometimes when we say, looking at PCOS, if you have PCOS, you're at 5 times greater risk for also having Hashimoto's. And if both of those conditions are doing opposite things to AMH, plus maybe you're aging, it's trying to put that number into context can be a little bit tricky, but it still can be useful. Absolutely.
And for those who are listening who are like, what the heck is AMH? AMH stands for anti-Müllerian hormone, and is a blood test that can give us a sense of egg kind of reserve. I'm not a fertility expert, but what I've gathered from that is that test is really most helpful and predictable in terms of seeing if you would be a good candidate for IVF, and not necessarily being great at predicting kind of a natural pregnancy, if I can say it that way. Is that correct?
Yeah. So AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone, it is the undetectable follicles that we can't see on ultrasound. So, and that's in comparison to atrial follicle count, where those are follicles that we can see on ultrasound. So both of those numbers can give us more context in terms of ovarian reserve. And they definitely can be useful to kind of get a sense of ovarian reserve, but we oftentimes like to pair that with other factors as well. Again, looking at age, because we know that age is a direct link, but also possible other, like what, a fertility clinic or an egg freezing clinic will also look at is, cycle day 3 FSH, and seeing how estradiol is also linked with that. So I find that to really get the most usefulness out of AMH, we have to have other other markers to kind of give it more context.
Yeah. So if we're now looking at a woman in her 30s who's coming into your office, what are maybe some of the conversations or things that you're thinking about once a woman is in her 30s? And is that egg freezing conversation coming up maybe in that decade?
It usually is. And oftentimes they're the ones bringing it up with me as well. Should I freeze my eggs? I don't know. My friends are doing it, this and that. And it's a tricky, I find, conversation for me to navigate, because I don't want to instill any unnecessary fear. We got to get things moving along right away. But I also want to be realistic too, and how we will see a natural decline, and we will naturally stumble upon more issues as we age. Are you comfortable taking on that level of risk as, if you're wanting to delay it by X amount of years? And that is a very challenging, difficult conversation to have. But being, I think, upfront is the best way to kind of go about that. I think, age is a factor that we can't adjust. It's going to be changing, every day you're aging. And looking at underlying health concerns and how those play in with that. And maybe we should be, for this region, maybe we should be expediting care or not. It's a tricky one. I don't know. What's your take with that too? How do you have those kind of conversations?
I'm the same as you. I try to just be as honest about it as possible without being alarmist. Again, you can get pregnant over 35, but statistically your chances are going to be more difficult. And I think that's what can feel so frustrating, is that, again, we've made all these amazing advances in our careers and our lives, but we still have this thing that it's biological. As much as we would like to delay or put that off, our bodies don't really care. So I think it's finding that fine line, and again, working with each woman to figure out what risk are you comfortable assuming? What is going to be the best course of action based on your life goals and fertility goals, and what's the happy medium? Because part of what I worry about with this conversation around egg freezing and IVF is that it's giving women potentially a bit of a sense of false, not hope, but false security that, well, we have technology now, so I don't actually have to get pregnant now. I can just freeze my eggs and worry about that later. And part of what I've read about egg freezing, it's not a guarantee. It's a way to delay that you're taking out eggs when you're younger, so they're healthier theoretically, and you have more of them. But those eggs have to survive the freezing and the unfreezing. You have to still get sperm to fertilize those eggs. And then you need to get that fertilized embryo to implant. There's still so many different steps that have to happen after the egg freezing in order to get pregnant. And I'm not up to date on IVF fertility rates, but from my understanding, they hover at around 25% success. Is that still about right? Obviously, that would really depend on a number of factors, but it's not 100% success rate. So like, I think that's where these type of conversations are so important. Like, is egg freezing and IVF a great advancement for fertility? Yes. I don't think we're going to argue that, but they're also not a like slam dunk that you can just assume that you can do those and that they're going to work out. And I think that's the hard part of this conversation is what there is no right answer, but what's going to be the path that feels best for you, essentially. And that's going to be very different for any woman listening to this.
Yeah. And I think exactly having that conversation with somebody who's considering egg freezing is exactly what we need to be doing. You know, we are taking the eggs at a point at which they should be at the highest quality possible. And we're hoping to remove that variable of like low quality eggs as being a factor with fertility. But like you touched on, there's many reasons for why we see struggles with fertility. Predominantly looking at like the body environment. So like when we're actually, using those eggs, how is the body receiving that in terms of implantation? You know, is there underlying insulin resistance with PCOS that maybe we've kind of overlooked because we just assumed things are going to be great. We froze our eggs. This is kind of, like you said, a guarantee, so to say, but we have to be looking at what else might be or other common reasons for why we see fertility struggles, like those thyroid antibodies. Anything structurally going on that might also get in the way as well, like endometriosis or any maybe large fibroids, again, that maybe could be part of the mix. It's removing one important variable, like related to age, but we can't just overlook and dismiss other aspects of fertility that can, make it challenging, so to say. So I think as long as we're having that conversation where, yes, this isn't a guarantee, it can, it's good to, get the eggs when they are of quality, but we have to also keep an eye on everything else that might be problematic as well.
And we haven't even talked about the sperm.
Yeah.
Right? The sperm is like, this is another frustration I have. I see all these women having these super invasive things done to them in the name of fertility. And for sure, sometimes the woman is the one who needs the support. And yet, like, it seems like all the man has to do is show up, like, jerk off in a cup, and, like, his job is done. And we know that sperm counts globally have dropped, I think it's like 50% since the mid-70s. And I don't see a whole lot of conversation happening about that. What are your thoughts on how much, like, the male fertility part might be part of this fertility conversation? And are we bringing that into the conversation? We should be, definitely. It's 50% of what we need in order to have a healthy baby, for sure. It takes two to tango, and we need to be looking at both partners. I think, and hopefully gone are the days where it's just a women's health issue where, like, the woman's going through, extensive dietary changes on all of these supplements where the male partner is just, supporting her as she's taking all these supplements for egg quality. There has to be that look at the whole picture too, look at the lifestyle factors that we know to impact sperm health, smoking, marijuana, poor sleep habits, high stress. Those aren't usually things that maybe a few years ago come top of mind when it comes to fertility, at least for sperm, but they are things that we know can have a profound impact. And I think if we're going to be having that conversation of what should the woman partner do, we have to be doing the same for the male as well, and having that full assessment done lab work wise, and getting a clear idea of where we might be falling short in that conversation. Yeah. Get the guys involved, people. I've seen that all the time. The female partner is on a super strict diet. She's taking all the supplements. She's doing all the appointments. She's meditating. She's yogaing. She stopped drinking. And most of the men, and I'm generalizing, like, they haven't changed. They're still drinking their couple beers after work, smoking their joints on the weekend. And that just, I don't know, that seems unfair maybe is not the right word, but like, it's just another place where the onus and the responsibility falls on the woman, and we assume it. And meanwhile, it's not like we shouldn't be assuming 90% of that. Like, we should assume our half, and the other partner, assuming they're male, should assume the other half. But
yeah, definitely. And to be fair too, I have seen trends where the male partner is becoming more involved. Like maybe as there's more information on, social media or that, where they're asking like, what can I do to support fertility as well? Because they're understanding that they are part of that conversation. So I have seen a change in that sense where it's maybe they're not as standoffish as what they were previous. But if we can get everybody on board, that would be even better.
Yes. Well, that's good news to hear. I want to wrap up by talking just a little bit more about this idea of unexplained infertility. And this is something I'm hearing about a lot in my office, where women are coming in, they've tried to get pregnant for a year, they've been sent to a fertility clinic for workup, and the kind of end of that diagnosis or the end of that journey is basically this like unexplained infertility. So can you just explain what that term means to start?
Unexplained infertility is a fancy way of saying we just don't know. So we don't have maybe the technology or the advancements to figure out why we're seeing problems, but there is a problem there. And oftentimes it's, there's multiple issues at play that maybe we're not used to seeing, or they just haven't been detected yet. Because we usually screen for a lot of like the top reasons for why we see issues, like looking at blood clotting disorders, genetic disorders, women's health related concerns. We do a really great job at screening for a lot of those top issues. But unexplained infertility is kind of that umbrella term where it's, we're not exactly sure why, but something is kind of getting in the way. And oftentimes it's multiple factors. And when we do kind of get that diagnosis of unexplained infertility, I find it is best to just go back to the basics as well. Because yes, there's probably a lot that we don't know, but there are things that we do know. We do know that we will still need good quality eggs and sperm, regardless of what might else be going on. So going back to the basics in terms of lifestyle support, quality nutrition, will always be of benefit while we still try to figure out what might be going on as well. It's a challenging thing to be given that term, having unexplained infertility, very frustrating because we go through testing to get answers. And when it's kind of like, we're almost more confused than we were before, it can be very frustrating. But there can be, maybe some just benefit going back to the basics, like I had mentioned.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things I just want to leave our listeners with, which is something that also came up this weekend in our conference, is that if you are in your 40s and you are thinking that you want to get pregnant, don't delay. Don't spend a year trying to get healthy. Don't spend a year trying to lose weight. Don't spend a year doing whatever you're doing. The sooner you seek help, the better, because you are at that point, like your egg reserve is declining and you want to seek care as soon as possible. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't do the diet changes and the yoga and the other things, but I think that was a really important take-home message that I'm certainly going to relay in my practice. If you are in and around that 40 mark, and you're thinking about it, just get fertility care as soon as you can.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's a whole nother, conversation to be having too. The idea, say if you're even in your 30s, you just come off of the pill, this notion that you have to detox for 6 to 8 months before you can start trying. It's, let's debunk that's not what we need to be doing. Certainly if there's other more pressing health concerns at play, like, uncontrolled, diabetes, so to say, or insulin resistance, we need to maybe put some work into supporting that. But, the question of should we delay or not is a big one. And definitely if you're above 40, I agree. Don't delay.
Don't delay. And yes, please, Alison said it, but hear it again. You don't need to detox off the pill. I was actually accused of working for Big Pharma this week because I made a post about the birth control pill. So there's so much like negative stuff happening around the pill right now. And that's a conversation for another day. But you can get pregnant the month after you come off the pill if you ovulate, and the estrogen will be out of your system in a hurry. It doesn't take months for that estrogen to like detox out of your system. So yes, no need to detox. You can technically get pregnant right away. So also be ready, if that's something that might happen. Alison, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I definitely learned some new things about fertility. And I think kind of what I'm leaving today's conversation with is the idea that whether we like it or not, our fertility is declining after the age of 35. And that might feel like it's not fair, but that is our biological reality. And I think the more that women are informed and the more they understand their bodies, again, the better we can make decisions that work for us and our health, and that we can ideally figure out what that fertility kind of process or journey looks like. But what I hope we've helped women think about is this idea that waiting or delaying your fertility might seem like it's a good idea, and maybe it is, but that might not be the magical answer that we'd like to think it is. If you want more knowledge about fertility and hormones and all things PCOS and perimenopause, please go follow Dr. Gottschalk on Instagram. I love her posts. They're fun and super informative, and it's just a great way to educate yourself more on this topic. So thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for spending your precious time with me today. Remember, it takes a village or a podcast community to really make a dent in this fatigue epidemic. If today's episode resonated with you, do me a favor. Share it with a friend or two, and if you have a second, drop us that shiny 5-star review. It means so much to me. Are you eager to solve your own personal energy puzzle? Hop on over to fatiguefixer.ca/quiz and check out my fatigue fingerprint quiz. Let's pinpoint what's standing between you and feeling your best. A big thank you to Jen Hudson and Drew Gardner over at Story Studio Network for bringing these conversations to life. And hey, just so you know, I've got your back. Your fatigue, it's super real, and it's definitely not just all in your mind. I see you and I believe you. Every 2 weeks, we'll keep these heart-to-hearts going, learning together and cheering each other on. Because between you and me, accepting perpetual exhaustion as the norm, that's not going to fly around here. See you back here in 2 weeks. Bye!